I'm curious to know exactly what are your goals for set 11. Is it to reach master or is it to start playing competitions? Whatever your goal is, I'm going to do everything I can to help you starting with this video. Today's video is a bit special because the goal of this video is to help you prepare set 11 and to help you have all the perfect items you want for the characters you want to play for the whole set. And I already know what you might say. This is a video and sometimes the meta changes, sometimes there are reworks of items, sometimes there's balance patches, each character will change. And this is why I'm adding something else. To this video we find a cheat sheet on Tactor where you just find the characters with the best items. The thing is, I'm going to update this cheat sheet every single week for the whole set. So you can expect this cheat sheet to be always relevant to the current meta because once we have access to data, I'm going to add statistics to the choices I'm making. I'm also going to talk about with other challenger players, of course, and have the most relevant cheat sheet possible at every single week. So I recommend you to click on the link in the description. You have access to this cheat sheet and bookmark it so you don't lose it, and you can come back to it anytime and you'll be sure that the items will be relevant. And for those who want to have an explanation as to why I chose these items, you can check the rest of the video because I'm going to explain everything. So I'm going to start with 1 cost, 2 costs, 3 costs, 4 costs, and I'll finish with 5 costs. For the 1 cost carry, I'll try to be a bit faster. The idea is because most of the time we'll use these units as holders for like 2 costs, 3 costs, 4 costs, or 5 cost carry. And the idea most of the time is just to play like with whatever items we have. However, there are a few units who can be used as reroll comps. I'm thinking of Kog'Maw, I'm thinking of Kha'Zix. But most of the time we just use them as holders. So let's start with Ahri, who is Arcanist and Fated. Ahri is a character who basically deals damage in front to back. She starts fighting the tanks and when they die, she can start attacking the backline. She might have the possibility to attack multiple targets in the same time if they are next to each other, but she deals mostly her damage on the primary target. And she has 60 mana for now at the moment I'm making the video, but again, if it changes in the future, I might change Shojin into blue buff depending on how much mana she has. So this is why you want to have a Shojin, because with 60 mana is 4 auto attacks before she can cast. Even though she's Arcanist, I have a friend who made a simulation of different items and he showed me that Rabadon is actually much better than spell crit most of the time, even if you already have a lot of AP. So this is why you will always see me with Rabadon and never with spell crit, even though spell crit might be a bit easier to build since it doesn't require 2 roads. And finally, the third item is the most flexible item. You can give Nashor's Tooth, you can give Gunblade, you can be Giant Slayer, you can give a lot of stuff actually, but the most important part are Spear of Shojin and Rabadon. You can also play Ahri reroll. I've seen it doing a good amount of damage in PvE, but I might feel like this can lack a little bit for the late game. Now let's go to Caitlyn, because a unit that will just take items for the future. You don't really want to build Caitlyn 3 unless you build Kog'Maw 3 and she comes, but in that case you don't even want to give her items. But in case you play her as a transition, you simply want to have things like Deathblade, Red Buff, and Runan. You don't really want IE because it's not that great on her, but fine, if you play her as a transition, it's not that bad. Then let's go with Darius. Darius is an extremely interesting character. I actually like the design they're taking and willing to do something else than just a Darius tank or Darius damage. Here is like he's a duelist and Umbral. So Umbral gives him a good amount of shield that can help him survive in the early fights, but he has a unique effect when he deals damage around him, and then after a couple of seconds, he deals a lot of on-hit damage. And this is why you want absolutely to activate Duelist so he can attack faster and deal more damage. So he's an AP character, and since he's melee, it's actually really good to give him Crown Guard. He doesn't have sustain in his kit, so you want to give him Bloodthirster, and then after Titan so he can have more damage, more tankiness, and you can even play him as a reroll for Duelist. He's going to carry you quite hard for a good amount of time before you find very late game units like Irelia, Rakan, you know the stuff. Then we have Kha'Zix. Kha'Zix is a Reaper Heavenly. So Heavenly is one of the synergy that encourages you to reroll characters. This is why you want to reroll Kha'Zix. You will get a lot of critical strike chance thanks to Heavenly and thanks to Reaper. So when you activate both traits, he actually can get 100% crit chance, and then after leftover crit chance is converted into crit damage. This is why you want to have IE Hush so he can still have some sustain, have a good amount of damage, and Edge of Night because he might be a bit squishy sometimes and he might get one shot if you don't give him an ability to escape. Then we have Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw is Mythic, Sniper, and Invoker. He doesn't really need Invoker trait. You mostly want to play with Sniper and Mythic, and he has a very low mana for his spells. This is why you want to give him blue buff. He's an AP character, so you want to give him Rabadon. So one thing that's great with Kog'Maw is that the more he uses his ability, the more range he gets. And after a couple of shots, he can literally one-shot the backline. So this is why you really want to give him blue buff and Rabadon so he can have the damage. And finally, the third item can be Nashor's Tooth. It's extremely good because it gives a good amount of AP, gives a lot of attack speed, so he can spam his ability and start reaching the backline in any fights and just win the fights because you just destroy the backline, and then after they have no damage anymore. Sylvie is a trick shot reviver. She's more meant to be a side character because she has an attack speed boost and AD boost on her ability, attack speed that can be shared with other units next to her, and this is why you mostly don't want to play her as a reroll. But if one day that happens, she mostly wants things like Ginzu because she doesn't lose any stack as her ability animation is super fast and she keeps on attacking. She has a lot of AD with her ability, so you want to give her Renan. And then finally you can have something like Deathblade, i.e. Giant Slayer, even if I think that Giant Slayer and Deathblade are better than Infinity Edge here, since she only does auto attack and she doesn't have an ability that can deal damage, so there's no point in trying to make her ability crit. So this is the kind of stuff. You can also play her as a transition unit for any AD carries we receive for 4 costs or 3 costs, we'll see a bit later. And finally, Yasuo is probably the most unique character I've seen in this set, at least for the low cost units. He's a character that's quite tanky by nature because he can make a shield. The shield scales with defensive stats, and also his passive that deals damage whenever he has a shield also scales with defensive stats. This is why if you want to build him as a side tank / carry, you want to have a very specific build that is Titan, gives a lot of AD, AP, and a good amount of defensive stats. That's kind of perfect actually. You want of course to have Bloodthirster because it gives sustain, it gives defensive stats, and also it gives Yasuo another shield so he can actually use his passive even more. And finally, the last item is quite more flexible, and I decided to use Adaptive Helm because Adaptive Helm gives Yasuo a lot of defensive stats, a little bit of AP, but most importantly, when he receives his damage, he can gain mana, so that way he can spam his ability, so this shield, even more. So this is why I feel like Adaptive Helm is probably one of the best items, but we will see with the stats later once the set is released and we have access to more stats, and obviously I will update the cheat sheet accordingly. Now, if we talk about the 2 cost carries, there are a couple of them that kinda easy to guess, and some other which are a bit less. So let's talk about Gnar. Gnar is very unique because he has a passive that can let him stack a lot of AD as long as he deals damage and receives damage. But the thing is, this passive also scales with AP. So basically, whenever he has AP, he will stack more AD per stack. Basically, that's something like this. And this is why actually Gnar, you simply want to give him double Titan, gives a lot of AD, of course, gives a lot of AP. So that translates into more AD. And also resistances, that's perfect because he's an AD carry that requires to be on the front line, so he will take damage, and that's why he needs to have more defensive stats. And after you just give him Bloodthirster, that way he can simply have sustain and tank even more. So I had a game with Gnar with Gargantual Resolve. That's an augment that allows Titan to stack up to 40 stacks instead of 25, and at the end of the fight he had like 721 AD. That was completely insane, and obviously he was just too strong, so I won the game. So this is why I recommend to have double Titan on Gnar, even if you don't have the augment. Then we have Janna. Janna is an extremely interesting character to play in the early mid game. She has a lot of impact in the fight thanks to her shield, but also thanks to her damage. So this is why you want to have Spear of Shojin and Rabadon. That way she can actually deal a good amount of damage and actually be a really good carry in the mid game. Then we have Qiyana. Qiyana is a character that you can play in a reroll comp because she's heavenly and she is duelist. The heavenly bonus she gives is AD, and she kinda reminds me of Riven 8-bit from set 10. The only difference is that she cannot stack as much AD, but thanks to heavenly she can still have a good amount of AD, and she really needs to deal a lot of damage with her auto attacks. If she gets CC'd or if she gets destroyed too easily, she will be useless. This is why I really like to give her exactly the same build we would give her to Riven, but this time is to Qiyana. So you want to have Bloodthirster so she can sustain as usual. You want to have QSS. QSS gives a lot of attack speed and allows Qiyana to not be CC'd. It means that for the 14 first seconds of the fight, she will scale very hard with her duelist, with Quicksilver's attack speed and all of that, and she will start to deal a lot of damage, especially if you give her something like Giant Slayer, because most of the time she will get stuck on tanks before reaching the backline. So having a Giant Slayer Slayer allows her to have amplified damage and deal much more damage. And then we have Riven. Riven is a character that has very low mana, and her spell isn't that big, but every time she casts 3 times, the third spell is actually much more impactful and will heal her also. So Riven is kind of a character that you want to build as a bruiser. I mean, she's a bruiser of course, but I mean bruiser like Gnar, and you want to give her a Titan, that way she can tank, she can have more damage. She's a bruiser herself, so she will have a lot of health. This is why actually having more defensive stats is actually better. You want to give her Bloodthirster, because even though she can heal from her third spell, she will still lack a lot of healing and sustainability. This is why you want to give her Bloodthirster. And finally, for the third item, you can give her another Titan. I think is great. And since she is a bruiser, she might have a lot of HP, and there's no better item than Sterak to value this amount of HP, giving her even more HP, even more tankiness, and even more AD thanks to Sterak. Next one is Senna. Senna is a sniper Ink Shadow. So the thing is with Ink Shadow, in case you don't know, you will get access to many different items as long as you activate Ink Shadow. And I think that if you have an offensive Ink Shadow item, it's pretty relevant to remove one of these items and just put an Ink Shadow item. So for instance, you can have Death Blade, then you have Red Buff, and then you have Tattoo of Toxin or something like this instead of Giant Slayer, allowing her to actually use these items and have even more damage. So I can see a meta where Senna reroll is actually really strong because she is a reliable character. But you can also play Senna as a transition or Senna without any items because she has something that's similar to Severe. She can buff the allies next to her and give her more AD. So this is why actually Senna is really good as either a main carry or just a side character you can splash in your team to activate the synergies next to Ashe, for instance, with Ink Shadow and give her a lot of AD. Then we have Teemo. Teemo is a trickshot Fortune. So Fortune obviously is not a trait that allows Teemo to be stronger. This is why if you play Teemo, you want to activate trickshot that allows him to make his spell bounce. And his spell is the Toxic Mushroom. So it's kind of a dot damage over time spell that lasts for a good amount of time and deals a lot of damage, but during that amount of time. And since it takes a lot of time, it's actually better first to have blue buff so he can spam his cast and poison almost everyone in like 10-15 seconds. And then after, since you're using dot damage, it's much better to have something like Morello to apply another dot over the first dot. So basically you have 2 damage over time on units on the whole board. Also they can't sustain that well because you have Wounded with Morello, you have anti-heal basically. And finally the last item, it's a bit more flexible. One is Gunblade. If you have a very strong defense and strong front line, the fact that you have a little bit of damage every second to everyone, the heal will be extremely well distributed around your team, and so everyone will get the heal properly to what they need, and that's why Gunblade is that good on Teemo. If you don't have Gunblade, it's fine. You can have Rabadon, you can have Nashor, even if I prefer Rabadon than Nashor. But yeah, these 2 items are kind of mandatory, and the third is a bit more flexible. The next champ is Zyra. Zyra is a character that has 75 mana, just like Janna if I'm correct, and then it means that simply you need to have a Shojin and not a blue buff to make sure she can cast much more often, and you want to have Rabadon obviously because she's AP carry, and you can have something like Gunblade, Nashor, Giant Slayer because she's also a front to back. Zyra is a Sage Story Weaver, so you can activate Sage so she can have a bit more AP, but the thing is like this is not enough. You still need to give her Rabadon so she can have a lot more damage. Then the next one is Kindred. Kindred is a low mana unit that deals damage in front to back. She's really similar to Kindred from set 4 if you guys played it, but this time she's a 2-cast carry. So since she has low mana, you want to give her a blue buff so she can spam her cast. You want to give her a lot of AP, so Rabadon that gives her a lot of damage. And finally for the third item, I prefer to have Giant Slayer because since she will spend a good amount of time attacking tanks first before attacking backline units, having a Giant Slayer allow her to just kill these tanks really easily. She's a Reaper, so if you activate this synergy, she can crit with her spell. So you can even have Guard Breaker instead of Giant Slayer. That is actually really good. She's a Dryad that gives more health. This is mainly for things like Gnar rather than her. And she's also a Fated. So Fated is synergy where you put multiple Fated units and you can link 2 of them that will share the Fated bonus, and the Fated bonus of Kindred is attack speed. So this is why it's actually interesting to activate this in the very late game so she can have more attack speed speed and basically deal more damage. And finally on the two costs we have Lux. Lux is a bit weird. I feel like she's not really a character that's reliable. Yes, she can deal a good amount of damage. Yes, she can stun 2 units, that's really useful, but there are too many fights where she misses the units and she becomes useless. So this is why I prefer for now not to stuff Lux. But in case you want to stuff Lux, or in case there's a meta where Lux is good, this is the kind of items you want. Shojin because she has 75 mana, Rabadon because she needs damage, right? And the Shojin Rabadon Nashor is the kind of stuff you will see in many different carries because this combo is just too good to many characters. So now let's talk about the 3 cost champions. So you have Alun. Alun is a new character and she's really unique in her design. She will deal a lot of damage in the row with the most effective health on the board. So it's not like the most units on the same line, but if you have like 2 tanks with 500,000 HP, she will target the 2 tanks and not the backline with a lot of small units and squishy units. So actually, I feel like Alun is a great character. I feel like she can be a big main carry, but for mid game, but for the late game, she kind of falls off quite hard because there is just too much health on the board and she cannot one-shot them. So that's why I really like to give her Shojin, Rabadon, as usual, to have a lot of damage. And this time, as the 3rd item, I feel like Morello is extremely powerful, so she can still have that good amount of damage / utility in the very late game. Also, another thing I really like about Morello is that Alun is Umbral, and Umbral has the capacity to kill units under threshold, a certain amount of health depending on how much Umbral you have, and Morello will help with that. It will give more chance to Alun to just finish off targets thanks to Morello. Then just next to Alun we have Aphelios, her brother. So Aphelios is a sniper fated. He's a really strong AD carry and he deals a lot of damage with his spell actually. So this is why I really like to have Infinity Edge, so he can crit on his spell, Giant Slayer because he will mainly target the front line before reaching the back line, so he will need to have that extra damage amplification. And the last item I really like to give him is Red Buff. Red Buff gives him a good amount of attack speed. Usually Aphelios will lack attack speed. If you don't have something like Red Buff, you will see him like being super slow, and also it allows him to have damage amplification and also making sure that some of his targets will not heal completely thanks to the anti-heal provided with Red Buff. So I feel like this build is one of the best for him. Obviously this can change based on the setup. If you have a lot of Fated, you might want to tie Kindred and Aphelios, so Aphelios can have a lot of AD and attack speed. And if that's the case, maybe Red Buff is not that mandatory anymore and you might want to have something else like Guardbreaker that goes well with Infinity Edge. Then we have Bard. I really like this character Bard. So Bard is mythic, trickshot, and his spell is quite different from any other spell because this is a spell that deals a good amount of damage that is mixed between AD and AP, and this is why his build is a little bit different than any other trickshot. So the build I really like with Bard is to first to have a Ginzu, because Bard is kind of like severe. He just uses his spell and keeps attacking without losing time with animation or stuff like that. This is why Ginzu is really efficient on him. And then something I really like is Giant Slayer. So Giant Slayer is an item that gives a good amount of AD, a good amount of AP, and attack speed. And the thing is, Bard is the only character that uses 100% of the potential of any AD he has and any AP he has. So this is why actually Giant Slayer not only provides a lot of offensive stats to Bard, but also allows him to actually deal more damage to tanks. Like we said earlier, Trickshot is also a front to back type of carry. And finally, for the third item, I really like to have Gunblade because once again, Gunblade gives a bit of AD, a bit of AP, and Bard uses all of it proficiently. So this is why Gunblade is actually nice on him. But I think you have other items, and that's something I really want to try, but I haven't had the opportunity, and we might see it with the stats later. I do think Titan is actually really good on Bard because if we think about it, Titan gives 50 AD, 50 AP, gives attack speed, and give resistances when it's full stacked. And the thing is, like, since Bard needs AP and AD, it's actually an item that gives 100 of offensive stats that Bard can use proficiently. And this is why I think Titan might be one of the best items, but I need to make sure that we have the stats from tactic.tools and we have more tests so we can actually see it. And if that's the case, obviously I will update the cheat sheet accordingly. And after we have Soraka. Soraka is an AP carry who needs to have Spear of Shojin similarly to Alun. She needs to have a lot of mana so she can cast. She deals a good amount of damage, so this is why you want to have Rabadon to amplify her damage. And finally, Soraka is a unit that deals damage in a pretty good AoE, so this is why something like Morello is actually really good on her. her since she will target many units. But again, if you don't have Morello, it's not as important as Alun. You can have Nashor, you can have Giant Slayer. You don't really want to have Gunblade because she's altruist, and if you activate this synergy, she already has some kind of a Gunblade activated in her trait. So this is why Gunblade is not as efficient. It's better maybe to focus on another utility / damage item like Morello, Giant Slayer, etc. Soraka also has a passive that allows her to have more AP as your team is losing HP, so she can actually go quite high in AP, especially if you activate Heavenly. That also gives her a lot of AP, so she can be monstrous in many games, and there are some people who like to play Alun with Soraka at the same time. Then we have Tamekench. Tamekench is a Breezer Mythic, so usually you like to play Tamekench when you reroll bar at the same time because both are 3 costs and both are Mythic units. Mythic gives good amount of HP and offensive stats, and he's a Breezer, so he can get a lot of HP from that, and that's exactly what he needs because he has a spell that deals a good amount of damage, but that deals much more damage if Tamekench has more health than his target. And this is why you really want to activate his trait so he can have a lot of HP and he will always deal maximum damage. On the other hand, what you want to give to him is kind of Breezer AP items. You want him to have Bloodthirster because obviously he needs to be healed properly, otherwise his spell will no longer be activated if he loses too much health. On the other hand, you can also have Crown Guard. Crown Guard is an item that gives him a bit more health, but that's not really what matters. What matters is that he gives him a lot of shield at the beginning of the fight, especially that is a shield that scales base HP, so he can have a huge shield, and when a shield breaks, he gets a lot of AP, meaning that his spell will deal even more damage. And then finally, the last item I really like on Tamekench is Dragon's Claw. It gives 9% max health, so even more health, and since he has a lot of health, he can heal a lot of HP every 2 seconds, meaning that this kind of Tamekench is actually really hard, especially against AP carries to kill, and this is why I really like this stuff on Tamekench. Then finally, next to her we have Tristana. Tristana is Fortune Duelist. You don't really want to play around Fortune because that's not a synergy that gives her offensive stats. Then you want to play with Duelist. Usually you like to pair Tristana with Volibear because Volibear is another 3-cost Duelist and you can reroll both units at the same time, and she actually has a lot of attack speed from Duelist and she can deal a good amount of damage. This is why you want to go with full crit offensive AD items. That way she can actually one-shot units with her jump, and also it's great because sometimes she jumps and she takes some damage, so having a Hand of Justice really fits her kit properly, so she cannot like just lose too much health for no reason and just you lose the fights because of that. That's pretty much it for Tristana. You can replace Last Whisper with Giant Slayer, Guardbreaker, this kind of stuff. Then we have Yone, who's Umbral and Reaper. So Umbral is kind of similar with Alun, of course. Yone has the ability to execute targets, and Reaper is a synergy that allows him to crit or to have more chance to crit anyway. So Yone is a very strange character, and he dashes to another target for 4 seconds and he will just have a huge boost of attack speed. So the goal of Yone is like whenever Yone dashes to a new target, his goal is to kill it before 4 seconds and before he comes back. So this is why I really like to have this blade. It gives a lot of AD and Yone will actually need it. You can give him a Hand of Justice because anyway he has Reaper, so he can get more crit chance and he will need to heal a little bit because he's a melee unit, so he will take some damage. And there's one last I really like is Edge of Night that gives him the chance to like not die just because he got CC'd and targeted by a carry from the opposite side. Next one is Zoe. Zoe is Story Reaver plus Arcanist plus Fortune. So Story Reaver is nice, but it's not necessarily a trait that gives her a lot of power. It's mostly Arcanist. So Zoe is a character that has 60 mana. So with Spear of Shojin, she only needs 4 to attack to use her spell. If it was blue buff, he would need 5 auto attacks. That's why Shojin is slightly better. Then you have Rabadon. Then you have Giant Slayer. So very offensive. The idea is because when Zoe kills a unit with her ability, it will bounce to another unit once more for the rest of the fight. Meaning that the more units she kills, the more her ability bounces and touches a lot of units. And this is why I really like to give her a strong and offensive build with Giant Slayer so she can get her first kill as fast as possible and then snowball the fights that way. And finally, finally, we have Volibear. So Volibear is a duelist Ink Shadow, so maybe, just like for Senna, maybe he will have an Ink Shadow in time instead of one of these three. He has an ability that basically allows him to heal and knock up the target, and also deal a good amount of AP damage. So basically for me, he's like a typical bruiser AP carry, similarly to Tamekench, but this time he doesn't scale with his max HP, so this is why Dragon's Claw is not as useful as it is on Tamekench. Instead of Dragon's Claw, you can have something like Titan. He's a lot of offensive stats, but also defensive stats. This is why Volibear can be a solid frontliner, but also a good damage dealer, while Tristana is having fun with jumping around and do her stuff. Alright guys, let's go with the 4 cost carries and just right after the 5 cost carries. So the 4 cost carries, I think most of you are really interested in this part. What I really like about the 4 cost carries is that most of them is pretty much more flexible compared to the rework comps we have seen. So we can start with Ashe, for instance. So Ashe is a character that is Porcelain and Sniper. She really likes to have more attack speed because thanks to that she can stack more arrows, so her ability deals more damage. That's why you really like to have red buff. Some people might prefer to have Ginzu, especially that they added the fact that Ginzu can be stacked on her ultimate. It wasn't the case before, but I still prefer to have red buff. I feel like red buff is much more explosive, and anyway she already has a lot of attack speed thanks to red buff, thanks to Giant Slayer, and thanks to Porcelain that also gives her a lot of attack speed. So this is why I prefer to have red buff rather than Ginzu. You can also have Runad instead of Deathblade because she can proc Runad during her animation of her ultimate, but again I prefer to have Deathblade that gives much more AD, much more raw power, something like this. But again, she can be flexible. You can have IE, you can have Last Whisper, you can have Runan, like I said earlier. So overall, she's much more flexible, but I feel like her maximum DPS output would be this trio of items. Then we have Kai'Sa. Kai'Sa is a character that also uses Runan quite well. She procs 4 times the Runan during her spell animation. In case you don't know, her spell animation is just like she launches a lot of darts, I guess. I don't know exactly, missiles to one target. And during that animation, that takes quite a lot of time. She can use the Runan 4 times. So you will see, if you pay attention to it, to see the Runan proccing 4 times during her animation. She's an Ink Shadow with Trick Shot. So you really want to activate Trick Shot so her missiles go to another target and she can deal a lot of damage to not just 1 unit but 2 units. And Ink Shadow can allow her to have another offensive items. In case you don't have another offensive item from Ink Shadow, the best I believe is to have Infinity Edge and Guardbreaker, because Kai'Sa, contrarily to Ashe, is a character that deals most of her damage from her ability. So she's kind of an AD caster if you want to, and the Infinity Edge allows her to crit on her ability, and that actually amplifies the damage quite a lot. And Guardbreaker, because obviously if you have more crit chance Guardbreaker, you also deal more damage. Then we have Kayn. Kayn is a very strange character, and actually I took some time to understand him, but now I understood him. And so Kayn is a ghostly Reaper. So Reaper, like we said, allows him to crit and to have more chance of critting. And Ghostly is kind of a Contagion-like synergy. So Contagion is an augment that deals more damage to the unit, and if it dies, it goes to the next unit, right? Something like this. And Ghostly is kind of similar, honestly. Think of Ghostly as a damage amplification, but not necessarily just for Kayn, but for the whole team. So something that's kind of support/utility, right? So Kayn is a character that casts once and deals damage, and once he uses his ability, he will transform. When he transforms, he gets more crit chance, and after being transformed, whenever he crit with an auto attack, he will actually spin instead of doing one auto attack. That spin can hit multiple targets, and if he hits only one target, the damage of the spin is also amplified. So basically the kit of Kayn just says one thing: you want 100% crit chance on Kayn. Thankfully, thanks to Reaper and thanks to his ability, he can already have around 60% chance of crit without any items. But you want to complete to 100%. So obviously you want to have IE, because that's the offensive crit chance item that is the most efficient on Kayn. And then also you want to have Hand of Justice, because he's a melee carry. Even if you can activate Sage thanks to Morgana, because Kayn and Morgana really go well together, you still want to have a bit more Omnivamp. And finally, one thing I really liked is QSS, because is also give crit chance, but I realized that whenever Kayn has more attack speed, he will spin faster, and that's actually quite valuable. So this is why his best 3 items are Infinity Edge, Hoj, and QSS, but I feel like QSS can be replaced with something else in case you don't find it. Then we have Lee Sin, who is Dragon Lord and at the same time Duelist. So this 2 synergy gives Lee Sin a lot of attack speed. And there's one thing that don't say on the name of the spell, but you can see on how the spell is calculated for amplification and damage. You have Lee Sin that actually deals more damage as if he has a lot of attack speed. So basically his damage can scale off his bonus attack speed. And this is why you want to activate both his trait, both his synergies. You really want to have Dragon Lord and Duelist so he can have a lot of attack speed. Now that you know that, you can build Lee Sin in 2 different ways. You have the Bruiser way, that is exactly what you see here, Titan, BT, and Styrak, very similar to Riven, you know, and Gnar. So this is the typical Bruiser type of Lee Sin that will deal a good amount of damage, but also will actually tank quite a lot, and that's pretty much what you want if Lee Sin is not your main carry, but rather a side carry to something like Tristana, Volibear, Irelia, you know, this kind of stuff. But you can also build another Lee Sin that is more like an assassin. It's much more risky, I would say, but on the other hand, it can be much more devastating for the opponent. It's like similarly to Kayn, you want to build him like IE, Hoj plus Hand of Justice. You want to give him IE, Hoj, QSS, or Edge of Night, but this means that your Lee Sin can get easily one shot at the same time. So it really depends on how you want to play. I feel like the safest play is these 3 items, but again, if the data after the release of the set says me otherwise, I will change it and I'll update this cheat sheet. Then we have Lilia. Lilia is an invoker mythic that deals some kind of AoE damage in front, and directly behind the Lilia and the front line we also get targeted by her bow. But the thing is, every 3rd time she casts her ability, she will actually deal much more damage and the ball will be much smarter than will always hit someone. So this is why you want to play Lilia with a lot of mana. Even though she's an invoker, you still want to give her a lot of mana, and she has low mana for her ability, so this is why blue buff is much better than Shojin. Then obviously, as usual, you want to have Rabadon to have more damage. I'm going to repeat this time 500 times, but this is what it is. And finally, for the 3rd item, it's kind of utility slash support slash more damage. You can have Giant Slayer, Gunblade, Morello, Nice Shortstooth, this kind of stuff. She will be extremely valuable as long as you have these 2 items and you have another item behind. Next to Lilia, we have Morgana. We talked a little bit earlier because usually we would like to play Morgana with Kayn since both of them have Ghostly, and she actually activates Ghostly much easier than Kayn, for instance, but she's also Sage. Sage allows her to have more AP if she's in the back lane and allows your team to have Omnivamp if they are on the front line. Her ability is kind of similar to Teemo in the sense that it's a damage over time. It's not a burst of damage, but it doesn't take as much time as Teemo, and she has much more mana than Teemo, so this is why you want to have Spear of Shojin and not blue buff. On the other hand, since like she's like Teemo, having Morello is extremely valuable and having Gunblade is extremely valuable, just like I explained for Teemo. Next to Morgana, we have Syndra. Syndra is an Arcanist Fated who has very low mana, and the more she casts, the more damage she deals over time. So this is why you really want her to use her ability as much as possible, and blue buff is obviously the best item you can give her. Then obviously, as I said earlier, Rabadon always here. And then finally, a 3rd item can be Giant Slayer, can be Hextech Gunblade. I actually like the Hextech Gunblade because Syndra is a character that scales with the fight. So the longer the fight lasts, the stronger she is, and Gunblade is one of the ways to make the fights longer, as she can help your frontline stay alive longer. That's why I prefer to have Gunblade rather than Giant Slayer, but it's fine if you have Giant Slayer. It will help deal much more damage and maybe make the fight quicker, but you still win at the end of the day, so that's what matters the most. And finally, I put in focus carry Sylas because I feel like Sylas is a bruiser AP, because I feel like Sylas is a bruiser AP and not necessarily a tank like Galio, who's bruiser just to tank basically. Sylas has a good amount of damage. You have to look at his spell. He dashes, deals damage, heal, and this damage again, and this is why we want to give him more like the typical bruiser AP, something we give to Volibear for instance. And with Crown Guard, more health, a big shield, more damage with AP. Then you have Titan, more defense, more damage with AP, and Bloodthirster because obviously Sylas' ability is not enough to heal him properly, so you want to give him a Bloodthirster so that way he can actually last even longer in fights. Let's go now with the 5 cost units. So There's a big challenge with the 5 cost units because since they come very late in the game, most of the time you don't necessarily have the ability to play around them, meaning that most of the time you cannot have the perfect items for them because you already prioritize your perfect items for the 4 cost units or the 3 cost reward, 2 cost reward, this kind of stuff, and at the end of the day you cannot have the perfect items for them. But just in case that one day you have, for instance, Lilia 2 and you consider actually switching it to another late game unit, then you might have to check whether or not there's a 5 cost unit that can take Lilia's item perfectly and be even stronger than Lilia. Spoiler alert, for now there is not, but I just wanted to give that as an example. So the first character is Hui. Hui doesn't actually deal that much damage compared to some other AP carries of 5 cost or 4 cost, but he has another utility, is that he will heal a lot in the zone he's making. So basically he's like Seraphine from set 10, but this time it's a 5 cost unit and he will heal much more and deal much more damage than Seraphine. This is why I really like to give him exactly the kind of items you would give to Seraphine set 10. So Shojin, so he can cast faster, Rabadon, so he can still deal damage and heal properly because both kills with AP, and then finally Morello because he has a huge zone and it's just so easy to him like to hit many targets and make them bleed basically. Then we have Irelia, Story River Duelist. So Irelia, as you probably saw it many times, is a very unique character who actually has range. So she's not a melee character, she's actually ranged AD DPS. So there are a couple of things to know with her spell is that first of all she already sunders, meaning that she already shred the armor of her target. This is why Last Whisper is definitely not recommended on her, and also she has a scaling of attack speed. So the way she scales with attack speed is quite different from what you would expect. There are 25% of that bonus attack speed that allows her to actually make her blades dance faster. So this is actually quite useful, but only 25% of that bonus attack speed. This is why Ginzo is really not good. And then finally you have 50% of that bonus attack speed that gives her more AD. This is kind of similar to Jhin if you play Jhin multiple times in different sets. Usually Jhin always has a fixed attack speed and then after every bonus is converted into AD, and this is why for instance Ginzu Jhin was never a good option. This is kind of similar to Irelia because if you give her a Ginzu, only 25% of that bonus attack speed is converted into more attack speed kinda, and this is why Ginzu takes forever to scale. Instead you would prefer to have red buff that gives her instant attack speed at the beginning of the fight. This gives her the ability to have more damage and also like to prevent other people to heal too much. You just want damage, you want AD, you want Death Blade, you want Giant Slayer. You can give her Gunblade, I think it's really not that bad if you want to give her a bit more of utility. This is basically the stuff you want to give her. Then we have Lissandra. So Lissandra is a single target unit. Lissandra is a carry who can target only one unit and deal a lot of damage, and if that unit doesn't die then he will throw away that unit and deal some kind of AoE, but the AoE isn't that big of damage. So the main problem with Lissandra is that she has a very low range and she's really exposed to any AoE damage and stun and stuff like that. So this is why for her I really like to give her the first two, which are kind of mandatory for AP damage dealer, Fear of Shojin and Rabadon, but I really like to give her Gunblade, or even if you want Bloodthirster to make her even tankier, so she doesn't die too easily and she can still deal a lot of damage. Then we have Udyr. Udyr is a bruiser AP carry similarly to Sylas, and this is why the items are literally the same. The difference is that Udyr is a character who has kind of an Edge of Night Radiant integrated in his kit thanks to Spirit Walker, I think that's called like this. So basically whenever he goes under a certain amount of health, he will just lose the aggro, so no one else will attack him. He will get back to his full health and his spell will change into something that's much more offensive. And there are many different situations, or when Udyr dashes thanks to his first spell, that's a Ram Slam I think, and then after he loses his health because he got targeted, so no one targets him, the front line cannot walk away and there's only the backline that's left around Udyr, so he continues to the backline and just like punch them forever until they die. This is why I really like to have Udyr with a good amount of AP thanks to Ground Guard and Titan, and then after like BT because obviously he can still die after, so you want to give him some sustain. Then we have Xayah. So Xayah is a trick shot Dragon Lord. Dragon Lord, like we said earlier, gives a lot of attack speed to her and to the team actually, and trick shot allows her to have more feathers when she casts her ability. So Xayah is kind of similar to Kai'Sa in the sense that she will mostly deal her damage with her ability, and this is why you want to give her a very offensive build with Infinity Edge and and why not Last Whisper or Guardbreaker, depending on if you already have Thunder or not. And what I really like to give her as well is red buff, because she might like a little bit of attack speed. You will feel like she's lacking attack speed if you don't give her a red buff and if you don't give her Dragon Lord. So she really needs to have this amount of attack speed. Once again, Ginzu isn't that great. The fights in the late game are way too explosive. You just don't have the time to stack Ginzu overall, so you just want to have red buff that gives much more damage at the beginning of the fight. Then we have Azir. So Azir is Invoker Dryad. Dryad is not that useful on him, just give a little bit of AP and allows him to not be too squishy, I guess. And Invoker is really important. That's why usually you like to play Azir with Lilia, because those two are late game invokers that actually deal a good amount of damage, or at least impactful. So Azir has a huge ray of light that deals a good amount of damage. Similarly to Victor, sometimes we had Victor in our TFT sets, and it's kind of similar. It deals a good amount of damage. When it's finished, he will summon a soldier that's basically just there and can tank, and that's it. The soldier doesn't have any damage, doesn't have anything. It's just like a bunch of HP in the middle of the board that can help the team tank a little bit more, basically. So this is why for Azir, I really like to give him Shojin plus Rabadon. He has a lot of max mana, so this is why even with Shojin and Invoker, he might take some time to cast his ability, but without Shojin, he will take forever. And then finally, I like to give him Giant Slayer because he mostly tanks. Then we have Rakan. In case you don't like Zaya and you prefer to have Rakan, you can play Rakan. So Rakan is very different from what we think at first. He's not a tank. He doesn't have any ability to disable units or stuff like that. He's actually an AP carry and a strong one. So what I really like to do with Rakan is that to put him in the first row of the characters if you have items for him, because he will jump to the furthest unit in the 2x range. So if you put him in the fourth, he can actually one-shot the backline. But if you put in the second row, sometimes he will just not jump on the key units and he will be less impactful. If you put him in the first row of unit, you really need to give him some defense or he gets one shot. So you want to give him Crown Guard, so he starts with a shield and cannot get one shot at the beginning of the fight. You give him Bloodthirster, so he also gets another shield and he can sustain from his damage. And finally, you can give him a very offensive item like Rabadon. In that case, he will literally one shot the backline if you can position him well. Then we have Set. Set is a Warden, Fated, and Umbra. So you probably want to activate at least 2 of his synergies. If you can activate the 3 of them, it's even better. Set is basically a unit that has a lot of mana, and it's really difficult to make him attack twice with his ability. So you really want to make it matter, but you have another way to actually give him enough mana to cast twice. And then this is why you will give him items like Titan. Adaptive Helm, actually that's really good on him. It allows him to have much more resistances, so he doesn't die that easily. But every time he gets attacked, he gets 1 mana, and this can help him attacking twice with his ability. And then Sterak, because he's still dealing AD damage, so Sterak allows him to have more HP, more AD, and I think that's one of his best item actually. So with this kind of build, if you have Set 2, you can have a situation where he actually attack twice with his ability, especially that it's not written here, but if you activate Fated, he gets Omnivamp thanks to Fated, so he can sustain from his damage and live much longer. And finally, the last 5 cost unit is Wukong. Wukong is a character that has 3 different spells, and whenever he casts his ability, he will switch it to another spell. So the first spell, he's giving some kind of bonk and stunning his target. And for the second spell, he will make an AoE around him. And for the third spell, he will dash and look for the best angle to give AoE in front of him, like a straight line. And this is how Wukong works. He has very low mana, and actually I'm thinking that whether or not blue buff is interesting on him, I guess it's okay. I guess you can play without blue buff and let's say a QSS, so he doesn't get CC, then he can actually have all his spells. Because one thing that's really important with Wukong is that thanks to the trait Great, every time he makes a full rotation of his spell, his stick will actually grow bigger, and yeah, that's what she said. And so his AoE damage will be much more impactful, and at the end of the fight, he can have his stick as long as the whole board and touch everyone with it. So you also want to activate Sage, because thanks to Sage with Morgana and another unit, he can have some Omnivamp and he can sustain, so you don't necessarily need to give him something like Bloodthirster, as he can already sustain thanks to his trait. If you're interested in actually grinding and try harding the new set, I can help you with that, because every week on Friday Friday, I update a meta analysis and I share it to my private Discord. And for everyone who actually support my channel by becoming a member, I can give the link in the description. This is how I repay their kindness and helping me making content. So every week, if you're interested in not only helping me in making more content, but also getting private content that will actually help you climb higher and be better on TFT, you can join my private Discord with the link in the description. In the meantime, see you at the top of the ladder.